Hey, welcome back. This is Not Aliens. This is Jared. I am interviewing David S. Brody today. This is really exciting. We are going to be talking his 14th novel. He is a bestseller on multiple platforms. He is a graduate of the University of Tufts and Georgetown Law School. He's a former director of the New England Antiquities Research Association, which is really exciting to me because I also have gotten to be friends with Dennis Stone of America's Stonehenge. And to have someone on 14 books or otherwise who has also been on the History Channel, Travel Channel, PBS and Discovery Channel, his first 8 books, Templars in America series, has been a Kindle top bestseller. And to be at the top in any category anywhere is really exciting. But for someone to have done research that breaks all educational norms of what we know of our American history and of North American and Latin American and Central American history is so important. So this is going to be a great time for everyone listening. Thank you so much. Do you prefer David or Dave?
It depends. If you're angry with me, then David. If you're being friendly, Dave is fine. So,
Okay.
you know,
So from
like
really,
when you were a kid and your mother said, "Come in for dinner, Jared," right? Like that.
so if I say your full name, including the S, I'm really
That's
angry.
right. I'm really angry. I really mean business. Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me on, Jared. Good to be here.
Yeah. So there, I, I have only put out my first book this last year with Olaf Phillips and Paranoia Press, and I did the same kind of research where I started to do something fictional, and the next thing I know, everything we're looking at really looks like there is a significant amount of ancient antiquities, whether post Younger Dryas or prior, that is just missing from our history books. And it didn't take long for me I had to include, even though I'm looking at megalithic history, the very trade routes, including those Roman, and we're not going to start with it, but I had to include even the Roman amphoras off of Brazil, and I want to get there eventually. But the entire paradigm that needs to shift, you've been writing about now for how many years?
So I've been sort of down the rabbit hole of exploration of America before Columbus since about 2006 when I first started doing this research. I met a mutual friend of ours right around that time named Scott Walter. Many people know him from America on Earth. And he and I started collaborating together on our research. He was out in Minnesota. I was on the East Coast. He was coming back and forth, and just sort of serendipity that we met. But so it's been about 14 years that I've been down that rabbit hole. And I like to say that, I'm sort of in desperate need of a change of clothes and a shower. But, 11 books later, all on the subject of explorers coming across the Atlantic prior to 1492. Whether I start out with the Templars, and this book focuses on the ancient Romans, but it's all artifact and evidence based, and that's what's the exciting thing is. There's these sites and these artifacts in New England in particular, but across the Americas, which are hard to ignore. My training is as a lawyer, so I'm trained in evaluating and understanding and critiquing and even dismissing evidence. And you have to do something with the evidence. You can't just toss it aside and say, we're going to ignore that. Whatever theory you have, the pieces of evidence have to fit that theory. In fact, every piece of evidence has to fit that theory. And so when I look at these artifacts, they tell a story. Now, I may have it wrong as to what that story is, but they do tell a story. And it's up to us, whether it's myself or you or other researchers, to figure out what that story is. I do know what the story is not. The story is not that Columbus was the first European to cross the Atlantic. That I know for certain. I think you agree with that too, Jared.
Oh,
That's
gosh.
so exciting. It's an exciting time to be a researcher. It's exciting to have the internet to allow us to do this research. It wouldn't have been possible for us to do this a generation ago. So we live in exciting times.
I totally agree. I try to explain all the time that we are literally at the heart of a renaissance. And I am happy that I'm part of it. I'm happy that you're part of it. It's literally staring at, for years, for 1,000 years, I always say that people bang on the blinky board, and you bang on the left, it turns orange. You bang on the right, it turns red. And somebody walks up and says, well, you're banging on the control panel of a 747, and someone yells heresy. But standing in front of this evidence, all of the evidence, It's like, you're literally completely wrong about our human history. And even as recent as the last couple thousand years, it's just not the story that was told. And we could spend all the time in the world trying to convince the people who want to keep selling this paradigm. But like you said, the facts have to. Michael Cremo said it forever for Forbidden Archaeology. I've gotten to interview him a few times, and I definitely had him as one of the pillars of the research I used for my book. But all the time, his quote of, "If the facts don't fit the theories, throw away the facts." And you just, as a lawyer, the facts. You can throw it as a lawyer, facts to help your client because you're there to work for your client. But when you're there to work, when the client is history,
Right.
you have to include all the facts, and the theories have to go away. The theories have to be founded on the facts. I'm very curious. How do you feel about having come from your background between Tufts and Georgetown and just any other academic, how do you look at their educational system in general when the facts that you've seen are so contrary to what they're willing to look at?
So let me answer that in two ways. One is, a decade or more ago when I first got involved in this, I think you're 100% right. It was almost impossible to find somebody from mainstream academia willing to even consider the possibility that these groups of explorers had come across. Over the past decade, however, we have been able to slowly turn the ocean liner. There's a lot more documentaries on television, Scott Walter's show, other researchers doing presentations, whether they're podcasts like this, documentaries, whatnot, radio shows. But slowly, more and more people are starting to sort of move the needle on this. And I'm finding that in academia, at least there's an open mind amongst some of the academic types. Not as many as we'd like, and clearly not a majority. But we are slowly starting to turn the ocean liner. There's an expression: it takes extraordinary proof to make an extraordinary claim, and it may not be fair, but I think that's true. And again, slowly we've been able to do that. So I'm not one of those people who believes there's this whole big conspiracy amongst academia to change our history. I just think it's ignorance. I just think people are stubborn. They don't know better. They've always thought this way. They have a vested interest on it. They don't want to have egg on their face by having to publicly change their mind or be proven wrong. But I don't think it's conspiracy. I just think it's human nature. I think that's what's happening. And but again, I used to give lectures, and people would look at me like, I was talking about, an octopus at the center of the earth controlling human beings by mind control or something, crazy stuff. And now they sort of nod and say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Columbus is late to the party. Okay, we get that. We're okay with that. So I've seen that over the past 12 years or so since I've been lecturing.
But when did you? I'm also curious about. I couldn't agree more, and I'm just curious where did the interest? I mean, I had an interest since I was 5. I didn't mean to. I wanted to either be an archaeologist or a filmmaker since I was like 5, and then you see Indiana Jones, and I was like, oh, I want to find the golden monkey, right? And I want to find mummies.
Girl. Come on, you wanted the girl.
Oh God, yeah, I wanted the girl too. And then, absolutely, and then. Even in my look at history for years, I never looked, for me, it was, oh, who cares about these giant megaliths? I don't care. I always wanted to know about Roman legions and different medieval periods of conquest and Khan and China. And when I got into Kung Fu movies, it was like, oh yeah, I want to know about all this stuff in the East. And then I didn't care anything about the idea of Romans in America, or that this continent had a whole history that goes even maybe tens of thousands of years older, that it had nothing to do with a land bridge irrelevant if somebody came across a land bridge, that there was occupation here for tens of thousands of years. And I was not interested until I started writing this last book 4 years ago. But then how do you transition from being, so to the point, I can't imagine you not maybe having a lifelong history of interest in history, but then how do you go from being a lawyer with not this interest to going, there's something, what changed, or what did you see first? What was the first thing that got your interest?
Yeah, so I did not have a lifelong love of archaeology. I mean, I've always loved history. I was took a lot of history classes in high school. I'm sorry, in college. My interest in this comes from the writing side. I always wanted to be a writer. I was an English major in college, ended up going to law school, but always wanted to be a writer. And so I had written three legal thrillers and was sort of looking around for an idea for a plot for my fourth one, what I thought was going to be my fourth one. And I stumbled upon this Templars in America stuff. I was living at the time in Westford, Massachusetts, northwest of Boston. And we have a legend in Westford, the legend of the Westford Knight, Knight, talking about a Scottish explorers who came over in 1398, 1399, the remnants of the outlawed Knights Templar, and they carved a medieval knight to memorialize the death of one of their comrades on a rock ledge in Westford. And that effigy, the Westford Knight effigy, is still there. And that's how I got involved with this. That was about the same time as the Da Vinci Code had come out a couple of years earlier. And so my introduction to all this was through that artifact. And that got me involved with the Knights Templar, which I had no interest in whatsoever before, ancient history, which I really had no interest in. But I sort of came in through the back door through my interest in writing. But as I said earlier in the interview, I went down that rabbit hole 14 years ago, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't believe the amount of evidence, artifacts, just hidden history that was down there. And now I'm a avid reader of Templar history, of ancient archaeology. I'm so interested in all the things you talked about during your question, but it's not stuff I grew up studying. So it really is a revelation to me. And Scott Walter tells a similar story. When he was first hired to study the Kensington runestone, he had no idea what a rune was. He's a science guy. So one of the things that he and I sort of connected on was that neither one of us had a background in this. He comes at it from a science point of view. I come at it from a law and evidence point of view, but we're trying to be objective in what we do. We didn't really have a horse in the race. Neither one of us did. And so I think it allowed us to be a little more objective and a little more disciplined in the way we looked at the evidence. But that's my background. And it comes just from a desire to write a fun, historical thriller type book. And that's how I came at it originally.
I think it's really important because a lot of the people who are super excited about this, that are listening to the interviews I do or on Conflict, or what we're just, whether I'm doing a lecture also, I get a lot of people, doctors, I mean, you name the field, and they all come up and they have a general conversation of, I didn't know I was going to be interested in this. And then it's so fascinating. And they're like, I'm a fan, but now I'm talking about this stuff at parties and people find it really interesting, and the feedback, it's so fun. But I think it's important. It was not a loaded question, or I would say leading, but I think it's important for people who are listening even now to hear why and how you got back in or got into it. Like you said, I think it's becoming a more and more common instance in this renaissance, is that I have had this fill in the blank profession. I had no interest in this. And now, whether it's Scott Walter's shows or other stuff that they're finding, this narrative this house of cards has fallen, and people are hearing about these. It would have been not something that people would go, oh, I'm going to go to Massachusetts. I'm going to learn about the colonial revolution, and I'm going to learn about our founding fathers. Not, did you realize the Templars carved a knight over here? That's not a paradigm that, even though the history existed and you knew it and the locals knew it, it just wasn't a common knowledge thing. I think it's exciting and encouraging for people to hear that they can not just, casually, with almost no effort, by reading your books, fiction or otherwise, that the things that they're learning about are really great conversation topics. Who wants to talk about Columbus?
Right. And one of the things I try to do, even though the books are fiction, I mean, there's a ton of information in there. There's the artifacts. I include images, pictures of the artifacts. I want readers to know that even though the book itself is fiction, when I'm talking about an artifact, it's real. So I want them to be able to see it and not say, oh, is this something that the author made up? No, that round tower, that stone tower in Newport, Rhode Island, that's real. That's the Newport Tower. Here it is. Yep. I can describe it, but I want you to see that it's real. And the story I write around it may be fiction, but we'll get to the artifacts that are in the Romerica book soon, but
Yep.
I put images of 20, 25, 30 different Roman era artifacts found in the Americas in that book. And so even though it is fiction, some people call it faction because it's so fact-based, okay? But my idea is to have you be on a roller coaster ride, hopefully a thrill ride where it's on the seat of your pants, but you're also learning all this really cool history along the way. That's the kind of book that I like to read. So it's obviously the kind of book I try to write.
Yeah. So maybe that
cocktail party talk. It's big cocktail party talk. Sure.
But it's interesting. I think it's the days of. I'm sure that there are definitely conversations. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm not a big sports talker, but I got into the Conor McGregor boxing fight thing. I had to talk about that. But I think this history is so much more fascinating. And it's to the point where it's just so incredible to think about. We have so many movies of Romans and Rome and Egypt and Cleopatra and Mark Antony. And then what does Rome look like in America? It's real.
There's an interesting tie. It's funny. We're going to go off on a tangent here, but one of the sets of artifacts, something called Burroughs Cave. You've probably had guests talking about Burroughs Cave. I don't know. Have you, Jared?
No.
Okay. It's a cave. It's a cave in Illinois, and with thousands of artifacts, and they're all first, second century. One of the theories about Burroughs Cave, and I write about it in this book, is that it was a group of refugees from a North African country called Mauritania, fleeing the Roman Emperor Caligula, and they were led by their king Juba, who was the grandson of Cleopatra and Mark Antony.
Oh, that's crazy.
Cleopatra and Mark Antony had Cleopatra Selene, and then her son was Juba. He was a real life king of this Mauritanian kingdom in northern Africa. Caligula came down because they're the ones who made all that purple dye for all the royalty robes in Rome, and they made $1 gazillion with this stuff. Caligula wanted their money. They took off. No one knows where they went. One of the theories is they ended up up the Mississippi River from the Gulf of Mexico and left all these artifacts in Illinois. But anyway, that's Cleopatra and Mark Antony. You mentioned them, and it actually ties into this potentially as one of the possibilities of how artifacts ended up in the middle of America.
And I will take it back. Fractionally, Scott Walter, we did touch on the cave.
Yeah.
Just for a second on conflict, we did an interview, and we did touch on the cave and the findings. But there's two taken as a one-off. That cave and other examples, like, oh, no, that's a hoax. Or that's, it became really popular to find Celtic stuff. It was really popular to find Phoenician stuff. It was, this is all not real. And there's just, again, taken as a one-off. That's how they always try to dismiss it. But here we are, and tying into it, we have this image on screen for people of all these Roman coins. And
right, so we'll get back to Burroughs Cave sort of at the end of this. But you're right. Let's start at the beginning. So I sort of came upon this this particular set of Roman era artifacts a couple of years ago. There was a newspaper article about a husband and wife who were metal detecting after a big storm along the coast of Massachusetts, an area called Plum Island. I now live in Newburyport, which is on the North Shore, right where the Merrimack River comes into the Atlantic Ocean. And there's a barrier island, about a 10-mile-long barrier island. It's basically a giant sandbar. And when the storm comes up the Atlantic, it gets pounded. And people go out there with the metal detectors afterwards looking for whatever. Well, this husband and wife, after a huge storm had come off the coast, this was September of 2016, they found about 24 Roman era coins had washed ashore, a span of a couple hundred yards along the beach. And it was like, how does that happen? And this is not the first time Roman coins have washed ashore. Other Roman coins were discovered further down the beach on the southern tip, other towns along the North Shore. There's 6 or 7 different occasions where Roman era coins washed ashore along the coastline of Massachusetts. And in addition, lots of Roman coins have been found in the Ohio River Valley. And you start looking at them and you start asking the quote unquote experts, how did these get here? Either they were brought over by Roman era explorers, either they found their way here or they got blown off course or whatever, or there has to be another explanation. And you start hearing people say, well, seagulls picked up the Roman coins over in the Mediterranean and flew across the Atlantic and dropped them on the beach. Like, really? Like, you heard that one. Or the colonial ships used ancient Roman coins as ballast, which makes no sense because the coins still had value. They're still, precious metals. Why would you throw coins away? You got rocks and stones for ballast, so that makes no sense. Or the one I heard was, I heard once about a grandfather who buried coins for his grandkids to find on the beach. I'm like, yeah, he probably went out to the car, he grabbed the pennies, nickels, and dimes out of the change holder in his sedan, and he threw them on the beach, and his kids found them. He didn't bring his Roman era coins to the beach, right? And then the last one you hear a lot of times is collectors must have dropped them on the beach. So Jared, you grab the beach blanket and the umbrella, and I'll grab the cooler and the coin collection, and we'll go to the beach together. Because everyone brings their coin collection to the beach. Yeah. Or bring your collection of baseball cards too, because it just makes no sense. People don't bring their coin collection to the beach. They keep it, under their bed or whatever. But so these ideas that these coins somehow magically appeared, and the explanations you heard are literally laugh out loud. The kind of things, the litmus test I always have for me when I look at these is, would I say this to a jury? Would I say to the jury, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we think those coins were brought over by seagulls? They would laugh at me, and I'd lose the case, and my client would fire me, and my firm would just, forget it. I'd be in the library doing research for the rest of the year. So if you can't make a straight face argument with these, just say you don't know. But there has to be a story. These artifacts, these coins are real. There has to be a story. So I started looking at these Roman era artifacts, thinking, okay, what else is there? And that was what led me, and you and I had this great conversation the other day when you first contacted me. It turns out you and I are probably two of the only people in North America who know about this place called the Bay of Jars in Rio de Janeiro. These hundreds or dozens, I shouldn't say, dozens of these amphora. If you want to switch to the amphora, it's probably the, what is it? Seventh or eighth, I think it's the eighth. These amphora were found, there we go. So many of them that the locals renamed this the Bay of Jars. These are basically the ancient shipping containers of the ancient world. These were stacked head to toe in cargo ships.
Yep.
But they were found in this bay in Rio de Janeiro. They were tested using something called optically stimulated luminescence, which allows you to basically test to determine when the last time was daylight, that a stone type structure, a sediment structure was exposed to daylight, including in the case, I'm not going to get into the science, but they were able to test these amphorae and basically came back 2nd century. And so the style of these is 2nd century Roman, the science tells us they were 2nd century Roman. So there's all these jars. So right away you say, well, something's going on there, at least as far as Brazil goes. Now, again, it could be that the Romans were blown off course and just ended up there. It could be they were going across on purpose to trade. But that's one thing. And then the other thing in Mexico, and it's probably the image right before that, is the terracotta head.
There it is.
Right before. This little head, this little guy is only about the size of a baseball. He was found underneath the floor, the stone floor of a Mexican pyramid. Now, the pyramid is pre-contact, pre-Columbus. And so anything underneath the floor obviously is pre-contact as well. He dates back also to the 2nd century. Again, optically stimulated luminescence testing. The style of he's got a beard. He's Roman era hat. The experts in Rome have looked at this. So he's also sort of a mystery because, again, Latin American didn't have, the Aztec culture didn't have beards. So he's a Roman era artifact that's also found his way across. So these were either, again, ships that were blown off course, or we have this sort of regular trade going back and forth. So these two things, coupled with the number of coins found in the New England region, plus a bunch of coins found in the Ohio River Valley, along with other artifacts in the Ohio River Valley, got me thinking, okay, there's an awful lot of these artifacts. There's something going on here. So we can look at each one of these, but basically these coins, so a lot of these artifacts were dated through optically stimulated luminescence. A lot of them are dated through carbon dating. the great thing about coins, of course, is you know the date. If the date's right on the coin, or if the date's worn off, you look at the face and you say, oh, that's Emperor so-and-so. He reigned in the 3rd century or the 2nd century, the 1st century. That's who that is. So coins are easy to date also. But we have this cluster of artifacts and coins in the Americas, and they all sort of point to the 2nd century. So what's going on? So I went back and I found a book that I had read about 10 years ago by a guy named Rick Osmond. Here, let me see if I got it here. Yeah. The Graves of the Golden Bear. I'll just hold that up and give a shout out to Rick. But Rick is a researcher out in Indiana, and he had this theory that, because he kept finding these remains of Roman era forts, basically spanning across the Ohio River Valley, parallel to the Ohio River. And Rick's theory, Rick came up with a theory that at some point, the Roman 9th Legion, which was stationed at Hadrian's Wall in the early years of the 2nd century, sort of disappeared from history. And Rick's theory was that they made their way across the Atlantic, who knows why, that they settled in the Ohio River Valley, again, who knows why, but there's lots of evidence of these Roman era forts, fortifications, burial areas, armor, all sorts of things that Rick documented that sort of tells the story of the Roman 9th Legion coming across. I took it one step further and I found evidence that the 9th Legion actually was at Hadrian's Wall, then was redeployed to help put down something called the Bar Kokhba uprising in Jerusalem right around the year 130 AD. And that's after that event is when they disappeared. So I started thinking, well, what's going on during the Bar Kokhba uprising in 132 to 136 AD in Jerusalem? Your listeners probably know that in 70 AD-ish, King Herod put down the first Israeli or the Jewish revolt. And then a lot of the Jews were allowed to remain in Jerusalem, and they revolted again about 65 years later, 132 AD. This is when the famous story of Masada, the giant suicide on the mountain fort where the Romans laid siege for, I think, over a year, and finally all the Jews killed themselves, and that's the name of Mossad, the intelligence agency in Israel. But that all happens around the same time. One of the interesting things about the Bar Kokhba uprising is one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Copper Scroll of Qumran. That's the time period of this, and it lists all the temple treasures that were taken out of the temple and hidden so that the Romans coming in to take over the temple's largely destroyed. They sort of rebuilt it a little bit, but they refurbished it and brought their treasures back in. The Romans are coming in. The Copper Scroll of Qumran lists all the treasures. I think it was 69 or 70 different locations where the treasures were buried to hide them from the Romans. And these treasures were never found. So one of the possibilities, this is where I get into the fictional side of my story, is what if the 9th Roman Legion comes over to put down the uprising? At the end of the whole thing, there's a few senior officers of the 9th Legion. They capture the last holdouts of the temple defense, and they make a deal. And the senior priestly families say, hey, we know where all this treasure is born. If you guys let us and our family survive, and you let us keep some of the treasure, maybe come with you, we'll all flee together. We'll cross the Atlantic or wherever, go find a safe haven. We'll take, and the estimates of the amount of treasure that was hidden in modern dollars is $1.5 billion. So we're dividing this up 50, 100, 200 ways. It's still a ton of money. So one of the possibilities is that they all came over here. And then that's validated by one of the coins that's found in the Ohio River Valley is something called the Bar Kokhba coin. It's the 4th artifact, I think, on our list there. It actually has the rebel leader Bar Kokhba, his face on it, and the Temple of Solomon on the backside. That's one of the artifacts. I think that's next one. One more. There we go. Bar Kokhba coin. And so we have evidence of the Bar Kokhba rebellion somehow making its way across here because of the coins. Later on, we'll talk about something called the Back Creek Stone, but that's more evidence of Bar Kokhba being over here. So these pieces sort of fit together, that the 9th Legion, the remnants of the Bar Kokhba uprising, perhaps the temple treasure, that may have been the motivation for getting all these people to cross the Atlantic and make their way to the Ohio River Valley. And again, all the artifacts, most of the coins, everything, the science, everything since a point to 2nd century. And again, Bar Kopka was 132 to 136 AD. So those dates work. The pieces fit.
What's really interesting about the theory, it goes without saying that the trade routes had to have been established. There had to have been, because I don't know, how much does it play into, in your opinion, because in my research, it was what they're finding tobacco and cocaine in mummies. And,
Right.
you know, I got that it was one German crew. I get that it was only one mummy. And then you start digging into it and you realize there is this wall of, I don't know if it's hubris or ineptitude. Like you said, it's like they don't want to look into it. So how many mummies, and God forbid, all the mummies we lost during unwrapping parties. I just can't believe the 20s and or earlier. And, you know, unwrapping a mummy for fun. But you have this, you know, right down to tobacco and cocaine and marijuana. And we're starting to find it in other work by other authors and researchers of all throughout the Greek era. There is different hallucinogens showing up. And so it just appears that these established trade routes through, I mean, if we want to go with the Sea King, you know, the maps that have been found, here we are with a lot of money and literally to just, I know it's not funny, but still seriously, literally it's a ton of treasure and 1.5 billion. And they can go anywhere they want. They work it all out. Like you said, why not go somewhere where it's unlimited natural resources and you can live out forever? And
someplace where you're not going to get chased down by, you know, by the emperor who says that was my 1.5 billion. You guys took it, you know, whoever the emperor happened to be at the time. So,
yeah. And the coin itself here is, like you said, here's an indicator of this actual treasure.
Right. So let's stay on this. So let's stay with Bar Kopka for a second. If you could go,
sure.
You had talked earlier about the Back Creek stone, which to me is a fascinating artifact.
Oh,
you had mentioned, I forget if it was in our pre-meeting before the interview, but we talked about how this was displayed upside down for years at the Smithsonian because people thought they were reading it wrong. They thought it was Paleo Cherokee script.
Oh,
and then,
can you believe it?
Yeah, it's great. In the 1950s, a Jewish scholar named Henrietta Mertz walked in and said, wait a second, turn that upside down. It's actually Hebrew. So this was found in the late 1800s by a Smithsonian archaeologist. So it's great. It's one of the few artifacts where we really don't question the provenance of it because it was actually found by one of the Smithsonian's own guys. But other, and I'll translate in a second, but there was an ear spool, like not an earring, but a spool that they used to wear back then, was found with it. This is in a burial mound. And that ear spool was carbon dated to between the 1st and 8th century. So it's a broad span, but it's clearly pre-Columbus, and it fits right in with this. What this translates to in Hebrew is a comet for the Jews. Now, that's great because that's actually the battle cry during the Bar Kopka revolt, a comet for the Jews. The reason being is Bar Kopka means son of the star, in other words, a comet. So the battle cry for the revolt is the same as what's carved on this Back Creek stone. So, I mean, that ties it really nicely. That's quite a coincidence if it just so happens that a comet for the Jews battle cry also is found on a 2nd century burial slab in the Ohio River Valley. So, you know, too much coincidence. That's too obscure. So that's another really cool artifact. There are other Hebrew related artifacts as well. If you can pull up the next one, I think is the Decalogue stone from Newark, Ohio. Nope, that's the anchor. But the Decalogue stone basically has the 10 Commandments